In this video, I'm going to teach you a trick that would get your audience to lean in a little bit when you start talking. Now, one of the key reasons why people aren't fully paying attention, giving you all of their attention when you are creating podcast content is because they don't actually 100% trust you, like wholeheartedly 100% trust you, which is fine, right? That's the way human nature is. People just don't fully 100% trust the advice or the content that they're consuming, especially when they're brand new. But it happens, regardless if they're brand new or have been a follower of yours for a long time. The reason why they don't believe you is not so much because of you, it's because they have these myths, these stories that they tell themselves in their heads about the way that things should be, the way that things are. And when they have these stories inside their head, they're closed down from new information. They're closed down from hearing your opinions and your thoughts on how they can solve certain problems in their lives or how they can approach certain problems in their lives. So they're very locked in on the way that they're used to hearing about things, the way they're used to thinking. Now, this happens not only with podcast content, but happens when you have a sales page or you have a webinar, or you have anything that you're trying to basically convince someone to take action, convince someone to adopt your way of thinking. They are always having these kind of stories, these myths inside their head. So the best way to make sure that you are getting people's full attention is to smash these objections, basically smash these myths, smash these false stories right off the bat, right at the beginning. So when you are about to start a new podcast episode, address all of the myths and the falsehoods and the objections that they have inside their head before you dive into the episode. Or if you're switching topics within an episode, make sure you address and smash all the objections, the false stories, and the myths right up front. Now, when you're able to do this, you're able to, again, unblock a lot of the line of thinking that they have, and they'll actually be open to hearing more about you, either more about your advice and your knowledge, your expertise, or knowing more about your products and your services. They're able to have a more open mind approach towards it. So what do you do once you have identified a false story, a myth, an objection that you want to smash before you get into the content? The first thing you want to do is to address it, face forward, front on, level with the audience and say, look, I know this is what most people are thinking, or I used to think this way too, right? And then you talk about the objection, the falsehood, the myth that you used to believe, or that other people, other audience members, or other people in your audience might believe. The number two is that you should never say you. That's the worst word to use when you are trying to address an objection, because when you're saying you're talking at someone and they're just going to be closed off from hearing, you address this objection. So if you recall from my first point, I never said you might be thinking this. I said I used to think this, or other people might think this, right? I never addressed the listener directly and say it's them, because it's kind of blaming, and people are closed off when they start sensing that you're blaming or criticizing, basically. Number three, don't just say that the myth is wrong or the falsehood is not right. Tell a story that is just the opposite of it, right? Because a lot of times these falsehoods, these stories, these myths are very black and white, where it's so extreme, like this, it's always this way, it's never that way. And the good thing about those kind of falsehoods is that it's easy to break it by just giving an exception. Tell a story that's just the opposite of what they believe. So for example, a lot of my clients that I work with will come to me and say that they would love to start a podcast, but they don't have an existing audience, right? This falsehood they tell inside their heads is that I don't have an existing audience, I can't start a podcast. And then it's an extreme, right? They think that they can never start a podcast because they don't have an audience. I tell them a story about how I started my podcast with zero audience. I was a nobody in my space. I started a podcast in the e-commerce niche, even though I never ran a e-commerce store. I never had a successful e-commerce store. I was a nobody in this space. No one knew me. I had no followers and zero followers in this space at all. But because I was creating compelling content, I was getting the answers to the questions that I knew other people like me that were beginners wanted the answers to, and I was creating this consistently. I was able to grow my podcast and now have 1.5 million downloads per year. So by telling that one story alone, it breaks that false belief in people's heads that you must have an audience before you start a podcast. So that's a key number three, is to make sure you tell a story. Don't just say, hey, the way you're thinking is wrong. Tell a story that's just the opposite of what they believe. Now, hopefully that helped. Now, if you want more help with launching or growing a podcast or creating compelling content, like the stuff I've been talking about in this video, creating content in a way that breaks through objections, breaks through people's kind of your ideal listeners, your ideal clients, relatively closed mind, so that they can listen to your advice and they're open to your advice, open to your knowledge, and open to hearing about your products and services, then I invite you to book a call with me. I set aside 45-minute slots for a no-cost podcast strategy call. On this call, there's no obligation at all. It's really just to learn more about your business, your goals, the problems that you're facing, how podcasting can fit into all of that. And it's really to see if we're a good fit for each other. If you like working, if you like what I have to say, if you're a good fit for the program, then I'll tell you more about the program and you want to move forward. Then I'll answer any questions that you have about the program. But it all starts off with a podcast strategy call just to learn more again about whether it would be a good fit for each other. And if we are, we'll tell you more about how our program works and everything on the call. So if you're interested in that, all you got to do is click the button beneath this video, and you can, or link beneath this video, and you can book your call with me. And I'll talk to you on the call. Take care.